Crafting an unforgettable one-shot isn't altogether simple. A lot of GMs try to actually overdo it. In this video, I'm going to explain to you how to create a one-shot that actually leaves impact, that isn't overdone, that leaves you plenty of room to fit the important things in and what those important things are. You're not going to miss this. Let's dive into it. Good morning, I'm the GM Philosopher. At GM Philosophy here, we are all about the mission of helping game masters to run better games. If you are a game master, either new or very experienced, welcome to the channel. Smash that thumbs up button and hit that subscribe button. You are in the right place. I also want to give you something. I've recently created an ebook. It's called Mastering the Game, 10 Essential GM Tips. This is a 7-page ebook with my top 10 best GM tips in it. If you want to take your games from zero to hero, if you want to level up the quality of your games, or if you're an experienced game master and you're thinking to yourself, is this GM Philosopher guy for real, or is he just full of crap? Well, I would encourage you to join my email list. When you do, in the very first email, you'll get a download link and you'll get this ebook for free. Link to that is in the description. This is my gift to you to try to help game masters everywhere to better their craft and to just contribute back to this hobby that has meant so much to me in my life. All right, now it's time to talk about one-shots. When it comes to running a successful one-shot, a lot of game masters actually kind of over-prepare and then they try to do a little bit too much. In my experience, this is where it usually goes wrong. In my experience, this is where I have gone the most wrong with one-shots. The thing about a one-shot is that you have a lot less time than you think. And in this video, I'm going to describe exactly the 3 key elements that are important to make a one-shot fit really well. Even if you only have like 3 or 4 hours, it's going to be a one and done session. These one-shots are going to hit with bigger impact when you include these 3 ingredients and when you do them really well and make them very defined. The first element to get right that you really need to nail to make your one-shot have big impact is the hook. You need to hook the players in. As soon as they start the session, there needs to be a hook that pulls them into the setting, into immersion, into the storyline, and gets them thinking, oh, wow, I'm super interested in this. And with a one-shot, you don't really have much time to spare. In a long-term campaign, a long-term adventure, you can use most of the first episode sometimes to generate a really intriguing hook. But in a one-shot, that hook has to happen very fast. I try to drop the hook, really rope the players in within like the first 15-ish minutes, because that will leave me the rest of the time to fill with the other essential parts and to allow for role play. You really don't have time to mess around with the one shot. That's the thing. So it's always a good idea to plan out that hook in advance. What element is going to get the players interested in your story? For me, I like to make it an interesting thing, something really intriguing. And you can set up for it in session 0. You can set up for it with handouts by basically giving the players the backstory of the setting and the situation. However, there really is no substitute for getting them actually interested in the game within those first 15 minutes. Think to yourself, what would evoke the desire for discovery? What can I do to get them curious? What can I do to pull at their heartstrings a little bit in the very first moments of the game? What could be done to really make them think, oh my God, like this is so interesting. Like what could we do? That's the kinds of questions you want to ask yourself. And then when you answer those questions with in-game content and then you actually succeed at that, you will pull your players in and they'll be super invested for the rest of the one shot. But here's the thing. If you fail to hook them in the very beginning, they're going to wander in terms of like attention. They're going to kind of probably think, well, there's not very high stakes here. That's one thing about a one shot that's different from a long-term adventure. That's going to be many sessions or a whole campaign that's going to span many levels. The level of investment is different. It's not that one shots are less valuable. It is that getting players to commit fully to a one shot and really driving it home and believing in it is that there's only that one session. They're much less likely to take it seriously. They're not investing in a long-term character arc here. They're investing in 3 to 4 to 5 hours of gameplay with this character. And it's up to you as the game master to throw out a hook that makes this feel worth it, that makes this feel like it's a worthwhile investment. So how can you do that? Like I said, you want to evoke curiosity, evoke the sense of wanting to discover something new, throw out something interesting or mysterious, have a weird NPC come in that really grabs their attention. Intrigue them with like a mysterious puzzle or a strange crime scene. There are a lot of ways to hook players, but you need to get an attention-grabbing, emotionally evocative hook set up very early in the game, and this will help set your one-shot up for maximal success. If you need a tool for this, there's really only one tool that I trust when it comes to setting up one-shot adventure, plot arcs, hooks, etc. This is an ebook I created called The Ultimate Adventure Generator. It's 310 print-friendly pages. It contains 163 random roll tables to assist you in generating nearly any aspect of adventure creation. But in the chapter 1, selecting your adventure theme, you can roll on a whole bunch of tables to like basically try to come up with your theme. In fact, there is a whole D100 table in chapter 1 that is filled with adventure setting templates. So there's like the Reawakening Wilds, there's the Shadows of the Mind, etc. So you can like plug and play those. But one of the best tools in this book for one-shots is chapter 2, to find the main quest or objective. And here you can roll for main quest type, quest urgency, quest stakes, beneficiary, motivations, antagonists, complications, objectives, rewards, initiators, obstacles, allies, MacGuffins, endings, themes, limitations, specific settings, and more. There's even a whole D100 table of plug and play quest lines that all really contain like their own elements of a hook, a conflict, and a conclusion. You can purchase this book on my personal bookstore, the ebook version, for just $5.99. Link is in the description. You also get it as a free download if you join my Ko-Fi. You can find it as a free download in the shop section if you become a Ko-Fi community supporter for GM Philosophy. With that being said, I like to use random roll tables sometimes to help me generate awesome hooks and to come up with incredible ideas. But you don't have to use random roll tables. You can use your own imagination. You might have some ideas already. You might want to take inspiration from movies and shows. You can even take inspiration from published adventures. But however you do it, make sure to drop that hook early in the game to get your players really roped in, to get them invested. Once you get them invested, you can move to phase 2, the next key element, which is the conflict. Now, every single adventure is going to need conflict. The conflict is going to be the challenge that the player characters are going to come up against. Maybe the challenge is they need to solve a murder, or they need to defeat a local crime lord, or they need to vanquish a monster, or they need to solve a mystery related to kidnappings or stolen magic items. There's going to be some kind of conflict. And here's the thing about conflict. You really want the conflict to have stakes in it for the party. I love to slip like emotional connecting pieces into the story, driving the players toward the conflict. If you can find a way to make it personal for the player characters, this is a super in-depth tip. This is a tip that will take your one-shots from mediocre to amazing very quickly. When you can get your player characters to care about the conflict in a personal way, then it goes beyond just running a mechanics-based combat game or rolling checks. It goes to player characters actually caring about their characters, caring about their place in the conflict and wanting to solve it because they are emotionally invested. There's nothing more powerful for a human being than an emotional drive. As humans, we are, how shall we say this, hopelessly emotionally driven in a lot of ways. And in a lot of ways, some of our emotions and the drivenness of them have helped us to become the species we are today, with all the technology, all the medical knowledge, all the good things humanity has. And this can be a tool that you use in your games, get your players hooked emotionally. So if you can find a way to make that murder personal, make that crime lord seem personal, right? So in the murder mystery, maybe you tie it into a player's backstory. You weave it in, you say it is your sister or your long lost cousin's daughter or something like that, right? And then you tug at their heartstrings with the emotionalness and the brutality of the scene. Or you make the theft kind of personal. You bring them in the jewelry store, everything's broken, and the jewelry store owner has their nose up and they're like, who are you? Well, why is the sheriff bringing you in? Can't I get a qualified professional to help me with this? And maybe the sheriff is behind them saying, listen, I don't know how to solve this. I need your help. And then so you have this sheriff begging the characters for help, and then you have the store owner basically being a snob. This might inspire your characters, if you play it right, to want to prove the store owner wrong, etc. So, make it personal, make it evocative, make the conflict emotionally driven for your player characters. And I'm telling you, this is going to be a secret sauce that's going to take your game from yeah to, oh, heck yeah, amazing. And your player's going to have a great time with it, and it's going to mean that much more to them. Now, we need to talk just a minute about the timing of the conflict. Now, again, in a one shot, we do not have a long time to set up and develop a conflict. In a long term campaign, you can maybe have one, maybe even multiple entire sessions kind of dedicated to setting up the conflict. But we do not have that luxury in a one shot because we have very limited time span. So we have to really track that time. We need to be very careful not to let that drag out too long, not to introduce it too late in the session, and then you run out of time. That's like the danger of a one shot. So we have the hook. We want to hook them in, and we want to move right into introducing the conflict. I mean, like right into it. Definitely before halfway through the session, we want to have the conflict completely introduced. We want them to either have already investigated the crime scene, or we want them to have already met that snobbish store owner, or we want them to have already had a verbal exchange with the local crime lord where they denied all knowledge, but the players know it's crap. We want to have the conflict firmly in place before we are halfway through the session. So if your session is going to be 3 hours, we want this to all happen before the hour and a half mark. Now, one of the next things to think about is that you want to keep these things simple. We can't have a bunch of moving parts, a ton of clues. We got to keep not only the hook, but also the conflict relatively simple when we're dealing with a one shot. You also have to take into account that you're not quite sure what the players are going to do. So very, very, very simple. Keep it like one clue or two suspects, if that. Like, you do not want to get overly complex with it. Yeah, use your time and energy to explain the details of things, not to like throw a whole bunch of other plot hooks at them. And that's another thing. Be careful about plot hooks. Be careful about setting up plot hooks that might lead in a direction other than where the one shot is intended to go, because players might bite on them, and that's going to eat up time. That could eat up 15 minutes. That could eat up an hour. In a long-term campaign, you have the luxury of letting players go on tangents, right? But in a one-shot, if you present plot hooks, your players may follow them thinking that they're, following the story, and this can derail the story. This can derail the narrative. A lot of times one-shots tend to be a little more railroady in the sense that, you all are kind of agreeing to play a storyline. Like, maybe it's a murder in a small village, or it's a haunting at a church, or there's a case of possession. A little girl's become possessed by a demon. Whatever it is, there's sort of a story. But if your players spend 45 minutes on a tangent that isn't really related to the story, yeah, it might be fun role play. I'm not saying to never, ever do that when you're playing one shots, but it's also true that you could miss out on big parts of the conflict, big parts of the conclusion. You might find that is time that was taken away from crucially needed time to get the storyline moving in the core timeline of the session. So be really careful about that. Be careful of distractions, and keep your conflicts and your plot lines very simple. Make them super interesting. Make them mature, right? We want to write them in a mature fashion. I don't mean mature as in gore and blood. I mean mature as in we want the storylines to be cohesive and well thought out, but we want them to be very simple to present. When they find the clue, they should have a clear path to the next step. It should be very obvious, and that's fine. A scene, there's a clue, they have to do some searching, they discover it. This is discovery. This is good, and it leads to one place. This might sound shallow for used to running longer term campaigns, but it's not going to come off as shallow in a one shot because of that limited time span. And that leads us to the conclusion. Every good story needs a conclusion. A lot of times this is like the boss fight, or this is when the players present their evidence, and they basically label who the murderer was. Maybe there's a chase scene, or maybe this is the scene where they fight the monster. In a one shot, it's really important to understand, especially if you're playing D&D, that combats can take a little while. And that's something to be really hyper aware of, is you want to leave plenty of time for the conclusion, because the conclusion is really where the players are going to shine. So the character arcs are going to reach their climax. This is where the fighter gets to actually fight. This is where the spellcaster gets to cast their big spells. This is where the rogue gets to sneak attack. This is a really important part of the story, and we want to get there with at least time to spare. I like to have an hour to deal with the conclusion in a one shot for sure. Less than an hour, and you're going to run risk of, combat. We've barely gotten 1-2 turns into combat, and already we're coming up on the end of the time. Or even worse, you're coming up on the end of the time and you haven't even started the conclusion yet. And then, we have to try to cram it in, and then it feels strange, it feels forced. So always make sure to bring that conclusion in early, early, early. The earlier the better. You can always role play post conclusion. You can always wrap things up with NPCs. You can have people come up and congratulate the characters for their victory, but you can't stretch time if you introduce the conclusion too late and you don't get to actually bring the closure to it. So the timing of the conclusion is really important. Another thing I like to make sure to do with every conclusion, especially in a one shot, is to make double sure, triple sure that every single player has a chance to shine. So if it's a combat, make sure that you are giving each player not only their opportunities to have their turns and stuff, but also avoid things like taking turns away from players. There are some spells and abilities that monsters could have that would take turns away from players. Like they can't attack or move for their next turn. Really stay away from these for a one shot because those are super feel bad. In a whole one shot where a player might be lucky if they get 4 or 5 rounds of combat in, to have one of those removed is removing a significant portion of their actual play time. So I prefer to do things that just limit the characters. Like maybe instead of removing their turn, it imposes disadvantage on their next attack, or it cuts their movement by half. I just don't like to use basically turn removing abilities on the players in a one shot. And then I also want to make sure that each player, each character, they get a significant storyline purpose in the conclusion battle or episode, if it's a chase, if it's a battle, whatever. So they're all going to try to do things, right? But with a limited amount of time, you only have so much time to make each player, each character feel like they were an important part of it. In a longer term campaign, you have a lot more opportunity for this. You have way more room to kind of introduce those things as they feel organic. But in a one shot, you kind of have to force them in. And when you force them in, you want to try to make them feel natural. So what I do is during the conclusive battle, I try to make it so that, and I try to do this early. Generally, it'll be the first attack, the first round of combat that I'll do this. Like if there's a fighter and they swing and they get a hit, I say, you hit. Maybe they hamstring the enemy. And it's like, your hit is drum blood. And with that amount of damage, you've actually seemed to cripple their arm. Their shield falls, or they're dragging their leg. Now they're going to have half movement speed, right? So I just made the fighter feel a little more special. He did something a little above and beyond. It wasn't just swing, roll damage, move on. I want to make him feel like he did an important thing. I want to put emphasis on the significance of that character's actions in this concluding combat. For the spellcaster, same thing. For the rogue, same thing. I want to find interesting ways to make that player feel like, oh yeah, heck yeah, my character just did an important thing, more so than just attacking and rolling damage. The reason that I like to do this is because this emotionally engages the player. It makes them feel like a bigger part of the story. And what is D&D at the end of the day? It's a collaborative storytelling exercise where we're telling the stories of these player characters. The player characters are the main characters in the story. They're on an adventure, and we are telling the story in real time. And it's super fun. It's intellectual art, and we do it together communally. And there's nothing more potent, more powerful for making that a more viscerally positive experience than making sure that every single player character gets a moment to shine. And so I make double sure to put those in the concluding combat because that's the most important kind of part of the adventure. And I want to bring those out earlier rather than later so we don't accidentally skip it. It can feel kind of bad if all of the rest of the player characters get their moment to shine, but then the archer who was back there just shooting arrows, every single turn, all they did was roll to hit and roll damage, and then they never really got anything special to happen. That's kind of feel bad, especially if you've done special stuff for all the other player characters. So I try to fit those things in early as possible, and then once I have fit them in, now we can go the rest of the combat. And even if it is just roll to hit damage, I've already kind of taken that step to get the players more connected, to make their characters feel more special. And so I can kind of now just run the rest of the combat having already accomplished that, like in the first round of combat, right? You see what I'm saying? I like to get it done so I know it's done. And now I can be like, okay, it's done. Now let's chill. Let's run the next 3-4 rounds of combat. Let's finish this out and just narrate the action, make it epic. Now, if you want to go deep, much deeper on the art and the skill of GM craft, I run masterclasses once per week in my Discord, so you should join. Anyone can join those, though they do have limited seating, so you want to get in early. I also post the replays, the recordings of my masterclasses in my Ko-Fi community membership. So if you're a Ko-Fi supporter, you can gain access to those recordings. And those masterclasses go deep into a lot of these concepts. I can't go that super in depth in the YouTube video because I would be talking for like, this video would have been like 6 hours if I would have gone really super in depth. But just to let you know, if you want to go deeper, friends, you can join the Discord, and that's the first step. And then look at the events tab and you can jump in. With that being said, I do want to give a big shout out to our Ko-Fi supporters who support the channel. They support the Discord, the YouTube, and the email. They basically help GM Philosophy to continue onward with our mission of helping game masters to run better games. I want to especially give a big shout out to our first gold Ko-Fi supporter, Craig. Craig, thank you so much for supporting the channel and for all the amazing things you do. And with that being said, that's going to be a wrap for today. Thank you so much for coming back for another episode of GM Philosophy in the morning. I'm here every single day talking about Game Mastercraft, talking about the best game in the world, D&D. So roll some D100s for me at your next game, and I will see you awesome people on the next one.